Greetings, fellow viewers, as we come back again for, for our anime Anticlimax. This is the number 4 episode.
Mm-hmm.
We've been going along pretty good. We're actually going to take a hiatus in October because we've got a big project coming up. But we'll kick back up again in November. But this time we have a very interesting series today. We have got the wonderful anime Gunslinger Girl. Very unique series.
Mm-hmm.
And one that I think, and one that our own Dane Kyle had talked about as there. I was actually familiar with it because I've owned it and watched it prior myself. So we're going to spend most of our time talking about the first season, with a little bit of touching on the second season, mainly for the musical highlights, because I really feel like the music in this series, it's got to be talked about, like all of it. But otherwise, plot-wise, we'll just stick with the first one. So why don't we just go ahead and get ourselves kicked off here? Actually, Dane, why don't you start us off with what was your first experience with Gunslinger Girl?
Well, I would have seen Gunslinger Girl. Man, how old was I? I want to say I was like maybe either middle school or like early high school, something like that. And it would have been my brother, who I guess would have had a friend that introduced him to some more obscure anime. Like I'm thinking of Gunslinger Girl, as well as like Gankutsuo, the Count of Monte Cristo. A couple things like that. I want to say he was like maybe late high school or early college at the time, and I cannot remember which of the two it was. But point being, like I was, relatively young, but not like a kid by any means, because I wouldn't call this a kiddie series whatsoever, despite it starring a bunch of children. And
well, if I'm not mistaken, from the way you described it, you've probably been about comparable age with Triella and Kleist, I think, because they're a little older.
Something like that. I mean, I think that was part of what made it have such an effect on me, among other reasons. But I think that it really, as far again, I'm not as prolific with anime as other people in the discussion, but as far as all the anime that I have seen, it's by far my favorite, because I've never really experienced anime that really hit me on such a personal level as that one did. And the anime that, just for reference's sake, because my brother and I watched a lot of Toonami and, a little bit of Adult Swim and, some of the slightly less cut stuff that would show up there in terms of anime. And the kind of stuff that would show up on Toonami tended to be a very specific kind of anime. So it was a lot of shonen. It was a lot of stuff that was very action oriented, very kind of maybe like, 10 to 12-year-old boy kind of audience that was intended. And yet the kind of people I knew that were into it tended to be a lot of like really hyperactive, middle school to high school age girls, and, people with that kind of like really ADD mentality. It was that kind of thing. And so then it was, in other words, like for me, for a long time, I had that very specific idea of what anime was and like the kind of people it attracted. And then you have something like Gunslinger Girl, which it's pacing, it's dramatic weight, it's lack of like wacky zany humor that you would always see in stuff that made it to Toonami. Like it was quite serious and very like Western in its sense of drama and its ability to tell a really, I think, very heartbreaking story, but within the confines of a science fiction kind of action series. I mean, I had never seen something like that. Plus, I could really relate to a story that involved children being kind of groomed by their elders to accomplish these kinds of very adult missions that require a lot from the adults that do them in real life, let alone from these children that are essentially these broken shells of human beings that get repurposed into, cyborgs. And it's something that I think it's all about children that are shattered physically and emotionally, trying to rebuild themselves and trying to get some measure of humanity back in a organization that does not encourage it. If anything, it discourages their finding some measure of common humanity once again. And I think that that's what's so affecting about it, at least for me.
Okay, so let's see, Mo. Tell me, was this your first time seeing Gunslinger Girl? What were your first impressions of this series?
Oh no, this is one that definitely, like I was saying in the chat, me and my brother got onto back in the day when he was still into anime and stuff. So I'm fairly certain he discovered it. Actually, I feel like I have a vague memory of him showing up with the box or like the volumes or something like that. And I watched through it with him, and it was great. I think I've seen it like 3 times since then. Over the years, granted, this was like definitely years ago, not when the show was new, but it was a solid like 12 or 13 years ago, I feel like. He since sold off all his stuff, and Gunslinger Girl is one of those ones I was bummed that he didn't just give to me. He gave me a fat stack of anime, but I definitely hold this one in Yu Yu Hakusho against him. That should have been down here. It's just good stuff, man. I mean, like,
we watched Yu Yu Hakusho all the time when it was on.
So fun.
It was on. See that one that was on Toonami back in 2004. That's when it made it to the US, and like that was, as far as like the kind of stuff that would make it to Toonami, as far as like generally action oriented, generally like young boy oriented, but having a lot of wackiness and stuff. Like that was a really good example of how to do that kind of thing really well.
You use
without
great,
losing.
dude. That's one of those
tension.
ones that's it had enough of that adult or like darker element to it too that it fit in well on Adult Swim. I feel like when they.
Oh yeah.
Oh, we lost Mo.
Oh well. While we're waiting for him to come back, why don't you tell us a little bit about is this your first experience with Gunslinger Girl?
Well, not my first experience with it, but strangely enough, we have gotten to one that I had not seen previously, or not in its entirety. I think I walked in a couple of times when you were watching it, like I saw bits of a couple episodes. And I remember you saying that, oh, this is such a dark and twisted series. I knew I knew it by name for a long time. Because when I started getting into anime, and especially when I started collecting anime, and you know this because we both spent way more time at Movie Stop than we should have.
Yes.
And there were always volumes of this. And actually, all the series we've covered so far, When They Cry was rare even then, and I think Paranoia Agent was getting rare, but certain volumes were always there. But you could always find multiple volumes of Gunslinger Girl and Cowboy Bebop just sitting there on the shelves. And at some point, I became aware of this set. And I think that was one of the reasons why it took me so long to get it, because I wanted the complete set, because they did release Il Teatrino came out 4 years after the show. So it was a later release, and it took them a while to combine them. And even then, I liked it when I could get something all together, but I didn't like it as much as I do now. But
it is generally nice to just have it like condensed,
right? And what's that?
Go ahead. Oh, I just noticed a lot of newer shows. It seems like they're doing the season 1 part whatever just to gouge you for cash. And
even this, and especially Funimation's the one that did this actually. And also, if you look, never mind. But it was definitely Funimation, but I thought I saw something else and I didn't, so that's good. This is a really nice set, but I probably slim it down. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, Kenichi rules, man. That's a good one.
That's a season 2.
Y'all are all conspiring to make me feel like an anime noob here, because like I still haven't seen Kenichi or Yu Yu Hakusho. I saw the movie Poltergeist Report, but I have not seen the show.
I've only seen a little bit more than he has on Yu Yu Hakusho. I've only seen scouting episodes, but I've read
pretty much, it's kind of Dragon Ball with a dose of heavy metal and Satan. You know what I mean? And then just put it on Adult Swim. There you go.
Nice.
I apologize for my connection issues there, though, but I enjoyed this. I pretty much echo everything Dane said. Continue, Jake. You beautiful, beautiful man.
Even before, like I said, it was on my radar for the longest time. I was caught by the title. I was caught by the cover art. I thought it was an interesting concept.
I love the Toonami.
We lost your sound there. But at any rate, what was I saying?
Cover art.
I think even before Brandon started telling me what the show was actually like, I started learning of its reputation. Yeah. And it does have one. It is a show. I think we can talk more on this toward the end of the talk, but I will go ahead and throw out there. We talked at length on the Cowboy Bebop discussions about how that is like one of the ultimate gateway anime. Like almost anyone, if they're going to ever be amenable to a range of anime, you can use Bebop as part of their introduction. Certain people more than others. Gunslinger Girl, I would argue, is the opposite. If you don't know your audience to a T, you're likely to turn them off anime forever.
I mean,
if you do know your audience, it's probably because, like Dane said, it's something that you would not expect if you were looking at it as Yu Yu Hakusho, Dragon Ball,
right? It was a game changer for sure on a lot of fronts with that. It definitely was, the one that made me realize, like, okay, not all these animes where it's just a bunch of little girls is bullshit. Like it at the time, if my brother hadn't brought it home or however we discovered it and put it on, I'm fairly certain it was him. Because this isn't the type of thing would have caught my attention at the time. I would have looked at it and been like, it's just a bunch of little girls. And probably moved on to something else back then. Right. Now obviously I know that not all those are the same. And
I'll say another thing about my early anime viewing. Brandon kind of got me started with shows like Slayers and Excel Saga and Evangelion, ones like that. Ranma and those kind of things. Tenchi, he tried Tenchi and some of these. Most of them had one thing in common, and that is they had fairly exaggerated art. And again, this is one of the things we'll touch on as we go on. We're not going to do a full discussion of both series, but I have to touch on the art differences between the two series.
Yeah.
So you did see a similar series prior in the introduction, because I also introduced you to Kino.
Not right away, though. Kino came later. But actually, Kino's journey is a good comparison, because where I was going with this point is that the art of the first series is not your typical glossy moe design for the girls, bishonen design for the guys. It's not quite Kekko Kamen either, but you get the idea. Like it goes for a very muted palette, very and again we might talk more on that later. But that would have probably also been a higher barrier to entry at first for a lot of things. And also the pacing is quite slow. So there's
got the vibe of like a college campus coffee shop or something like that. I don't know. It's just got a very sort of neutral. I think
this was one that if I had been into anime really in college and I could see a group like really getting sitting around having coffee watching.
Oh yeah, actually, and I mean You know, I would imagine that the experience of someone, you know, coming in blind from your typical anime of the time, looking at it might have been similar to the experience of visiting like a museum if you don't give a shit about art, you know. It's just like,
well,
nothing special here, but it is,
Well,
you know, it's got its own charm.
The worst shows at that time. Kino was one. Another one that I know some people were bored to tears by, but it had its moments, and it had a similar vibe, I think, artistically, was Gazaraki. You know, but that one was, you know, the art is kind of, and again, none of them really, like even Bebop had more of that typical anime flair to the art than a lot of these others.
Gazaraki was super slow.
Yeah, but it also had great music.
Well, this one, the art, well, I guess we'll get into that. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Brandon.
So, why don't we go ahead? I'm going to just launch really quickly into the plot because to me,
you haven't done your intro.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I haven't. Well, I was introduced to this. There was a time when I had wanted to check out anything and everything anime. I'd kind of gotten a slow introduction when I was in high school, late high school, with Ranma. First introduced through the manga, and when I was asked to go pick some up for a person, then I kept them. And then realizing, wait, I liked Sailor Moon. That's on that. And slowly building up. Then when I finally got my own job and actual money that I could spend on my collection for it, that's when I was able to really expand my horizons. And this series was one of those that I saw and I said, this looks unique. I did really like Kino's journey at the time, and it reminded me a little bit of that art style wise. And a couple of our friends who were even more into anime than we were had actually let me know about the series first off. So I was like, I have to get in on this. And I was taken aback by the level of darkness there. I thought it was going to be more of an action-based drama, sort of like noir, which that's a hard. That one I didn't care as much for, but it had a kick-ass opener. But you know, things like that. But it turned out to be much more, like I say, much closer to something like Kino. I guess noir, as told by the people who wrote Kino's journey, in a way. So it was a very unique experience. So to me, I was surprised a little bit when Dane just brought that one up out of the blue. We were talking about anime discussions. I was like, I know that one.
It's not one that most people really know about. And, well, that's part of what I like about it, plus the fact that it touches on themes that I think are really pertinent to any period in history, especially the modern day, where you know, children are more than ever expected to be the puppets of their adults, their caregivers, or society at large, or whatever. Like, you know, they're supposed to like make their parents look good, or you know, in extreme cases, you have like parents that are or children that are in cults or are used as, you know, whatever kind of tools for adults abuse and stuff. In this case, they're being used by the state, and you know, it's how does one navigate such a field while trying to maintain some semblance of humanity, because you know, well, the plot will help flesh that out a little bit.
And actually, why don't I go ahead and I'm gonna touch lightly on the plot overall, because I consider normally I would say characters then plot, but a lot of the series is about fleshing out the characters.
Yeah.
So why don't I go ahead and go through the basics of the plot? It's essentially about this organization called the Social Welfare Organization, which is given these cybernetic components to these kind of near-death little girls. And they have then taken them, kind of mind-wiped them and conditioned. They actually use that word many times, and turn them into these trained assassins. And each one has a different handler. The series itself, the first season, goes through each of those, the handler and girl teams, gives you some backdrop, and each time you learn more about each of the characters, you learn a little bit more about the organization and the plot itself. It's a
they call them fratellos too, which
yeah.
I think is really cool, which is like Italian for siblings.
It's in Italy, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you skipped that important bit of the plot, which is this is an Italian set series, and they've leaned heavily into that. There are elements of there's a lot of regional infighting and factionalism that is the main political backdrop that everything falls against.
They're an anti-terrorist organization for the most part, because that's where most of their work is.
Yeah, and every now and again they help out some mafia stuff.
Well, and the Italian setting's really important, not just for the fact that, well, Italy as a country is obviously extremely old, and a city like Rome is obviously Rome is a weird place because it's got history all over the place, but it's history from, thousands of years ago, plus Mussolini's place, and just different, all these things kind of all hodgepodge together. So it's got that going for it, but it's got, in Italy, from what I understand, they have plenty of government corruption, and they don't entirely have a totally free press, and things like that. So I mean, they touch upon those things, plus a state that that has a lot more explicit authority over its citizens than, like, I think if you were to do like per capita, I imagine that our government probably has more influence per citizen just because our population's bigger. But I think, or rather, if you were to relatively speaking, I think that the society that's portrayed here, their government is a lot more explicitly authoritarian. Plus, it's obviously got several feet planted firmly in science fiction, but it's not that far removed from our own reality, which I think is a really smart thing. Outside of the cybernetic enhancements, which I imagine we're probably a couple of decades away from getting, outside of that, it's like there's really nothing about this that's too out of the ordinary.
Right. It could be set in pretty much contemporary times in a lot of ways. Sort of not necessarily as the world exists now, but like you said, other than the implants, there's very, very little that couldn't be the case. And one of the uncomfortable things about the show is that no matter who you don't. There was something I was thinking of earlier that I cannot for the life of me remember now which one it was. There was something I was wanting to compare it to. But the idea is like you don't really get to, because of the niche characters, if you will, you don't necessarily have quite that vibe of I can really, really relate, but it's enough that you can definitely sympathize. But the cool thing about the show is that you see, that's what I was going to compare it to. I don't know why I forgot. It's kind of like Battle Royale, and that you got these people in this very unfortunate situation, and it's a character study on how they react to that situation.
Exactly.
And the girls are not expected to live into adulthood.
No,
they don't really expect these things are experimental at best. So this is a reason why they are doing these things. I find it interesting that they twist it around and make them assassins, but they are a very effective group of assassins.
Oh yeah, no one expects to get shot in the face out of a violin case by a little girl, you know.
Well, it's basically like, as I was actually rewatching Spy Kids the other night, and it's like essentially if you took that basic concept and matured it quite a lot, because again, no one would expect children to be able to do all that kind of stuff, and it's something like, it's interesting you said that you couldn't like 100%, like you could sympathize, but like I guess not. I mean, technically none of us are cybernetic little girls, but it's like, well, but I Well, I would say that
I think what I was trying to say was that it was more extreme example. Like with Battle Royale, they were school kids. They were just random kids. They were delinquents for the most part, but they were random kids. Their teacher was like a harried, I am so over this shit teacher. You know, those are more relatable roles than like government, elite government agents and cybernetically enhanced girls. That was kind of the point I was going with there. But
hey, now let's not assume each other's backgrounds here, right? I just might be a cybernetic.
You might be,
I mean?
and you'd be a good one.
You guys don't know who I've served in the past.
And with
that's kind of why I said that, though, because with me, like for example, I was homeschooled. My parents were very like authoritarian, very strict disciplinarians, very much like constantly like I felt like I was always in training, like I was constantly being fed a certain amount of dogma and just all these different rules of do's and don'ts and stuff. And it's like, how does one differentiate in this kind of environment? How do you try to become your own person? And that's why I really felt for all the characters, especially like Kleiss, who was the one with the glasses who just kind of read all the time. Like that reminded me a lot of myself, because when you're in that kind of environment, you don't really have anywhere else to go except into your own imagination. And I felt like that one, her story in particular, really hit close to home. And that's why I was like, well, this really, I can, it's good that, that there are other people out there in some way, that kind of, they went through something similar,
Well,
right.
Why don't we go ahead and dive into the characters, because that really is the breadth of the story. And I'll touch a little bit on the second season as we go, and we'll hit more plot points through the characters.
Before we do that real quick, I do want to say, like, relative to the second season, one of the biggest differences, and I think a lot of people felt like this was a noticeable difference, and they felt like it was one of the few strengths of the second season relative to the first one. The first one is very thinly plotted. It's heavy on character development.
It's world building.
Heavy on world building. And they do a really good job of setting you in a time and place, and you feel like you know what's going on. But what's going on is like a mission here, a mission there, a mission. It's not really, you've got the overarching story, but nothing is really point A to B to C to whatever. And the second one, they actually whittle it down to one main story arc that you meet Franco and Franca in the first season, but they don't really take off till But I like that difference, and it's worth noticing that it makes for interesting viewing. If you could take either one almost as a standalone, although without the world building of the first one, the second one would be a lot weaker.
Yeah, you'd be doing yourself a huge disservice skipping
it. It is worth checking out. If you have not checked out the second one, I'm going to.
You know what the storytelling of the season one, what it reminded me of. It was like I'm thinking of like the first maybe 3 seasons of Lost, where you would have an episode that focused on a particular character, and you would see their backstory and how it related to the present situation. And often, and I'm a big fan of parallel stories. I like parallel storytelling, either between one set. Exactly. That's part of what I loved about it, was that whatever was happening in the past, it intersected very heavily with what was going on in the present time. And it was usually a way, one usually shed more light on the other. And I think, to me, that's really good storytelling, because you accomplish 2 things at once, and you also, one period of time helps to bolster up the other period of time, and so you get twice as much development done at the same time. And in this case, I was okay with them being a little bit more episodic in their missions, because I loved the characters so much, and I felt like their struggle, like that was the heart of the show, and that's why, like, I bring up the first 3 seasons of Lost in particular, because that was a lot of introduction of character and a lot of how do these very, very different people, how do they all coexist in this extreme situation, and we have this other mystery that unfolds. But like the first 2 seasons in particular was all about the characters unfolding and how their past and their present, go along similar paths, and you see something similar here.
It's go ahead.
I was saying, why don't we move into the characters?
Yeah.
I want to make sure we get through them before we run out of the time, and there are a lot of them to go through. I'm not 100% of all the orders, so you can correct me if I get them wrong, but I know where they start out, which was with Jose and Henrietta.
Yeah.
And each one of them has a different kind of relationship to their handler, or Fratella, really. But they, Henrietta is, of course, a little girl, and very much, I think it's her and another one of the 2 youngest ones. But she is definitely very young. But
Rico's the other one, I think, but I'm sure we'll get to her.
I'm not 100% sure. The only one I could find an explicit reference to age was Rico, and I think she's supposed to be 11 when she was taken into the company. But Henrietta's got to be that young or younger.
She's got to be around that age, if not younger, because she's very small. She's trying to, but she's at that almost a tween age, where she is learning about feelings of love, yet having to balance it out with being a cold-hearted killer, which is kind of, like I say, is that duality within all of them, but some of them it's more than others. And then you've got Jose, or Jose, as they pronounce it. But he has a very dark past, and you don't find out as much about it in the first season, but they definitely flesh him out a lot in the second season to give you more of a reason why he's treating her a lot like a little sister. And a lot of the other handlers kind of chide him on that, especially the next one that we talk about. But it's a very interesting duality of the relationship, and she's a great introduction to this project, what they do and how they do it. What are y'all's thoughts on the whole Henrietta Jose duality?
She's a great protagonist. Actually, that duo, they're great protagonists, because Jose is someone who he's in a very precarious position, and I love characters that want to do the right thing within their particular social milieu, even though the rules within that particular system are such that anyone outside of that would say, oh, this is monstrous, this is exploitive, this is this and that, but within their time and place and environment, they are trying to do what they feel is right. And in his case, it's to serve his country and to, just, do the basic counterintelligence type stuff that, that tons of people do every day, and good for it, because otherwise we wouldn't be alive. So he's trying to be that guy, but he also, he and his, his department, they're doing it on the backs of these little girls. And so, but within that inherently exploitive system, he is trying to still hold on to his morality and still try to do right by these girls, or his girl specifically, because that's, what he has some degree of control over. So he tries to really give Henrietta the best kind of upbringing, or sireship, apprenticeship, or whatever, trying to give that the best life that he really can. And that's why he really is very caring to her and tries to enrich her life with, like, the telescope, and with, going and trying to live that fulfilled life. And well, that's also for Henrietta, though, that also kind of gets her a little bit into trouble because her loyalty to Jose is so fierce, because she genuinely loves him, because he is like a big brother to her, and like the one person in the world who genuinely cares that whether she lives or dies. And so her loyalty is fierce, and it gets to the point where, you know, she has to like, oh, does she need to be conditioned further and that kind of stuff. And Jose is different from the other handlers, where most of the other handlers, they just see the girls as things. They don't see them as people in any way. And so they just treat them like dogs, or like, you know, these things that are disposable, like how you know, you wouldn't treat your computer that way. You know, and it's such that I think he makes for a great protagonist, because people generally, if they're in a, you know, it's very easy to for someone on the outside to say, oh, how can you take part in the system that is exploitive or whatever. But it's like, well, a lot of the time people in their particular environments are trying to do what they feel is right within those environments, whatever we may think about them from the outside. And so that being said, I feel like he's trying to do what he feels is right, while also doing the best that he can within this thing that he's clearly not happy about, but he also knows that there's not a whole lot he can do to change it, with his, because he's not like, you know, the CIA he's not like the head of the CIA, or what we would what we, you know, as the similar Italian counterintelligence, to where he could have some kind of sway over this thing. So he's trying to do his
the
best
best
within
that he can within that. Like you said, you know, like he could just bow out of it, or probably not. I don't know if they'd like put a bullet in his head or whatever.
Kind of find out he's kind of stuck, so he probably couldn't really bow out. But
yeah,
well,
right.
a lot of big motivation for doing what he did.
He does have
a lot of people you'll find throughout history, that you know, ancient history or relatively older history, and now, you know, what you'll find is that people are often born in these situations where, like, let's say that you're the son of a nobleman and you have serfs, you know, or you're the, you know, daughter of a plantation owner and you have slaves or something. And it's like, you nowadays, in both of those things, we would look at that and go, oh, it's exploitive, it's unjust, it's this, it's that, which is true. But also at the same time, you think about the standards of the time and of the place, the environment, and you think, well, you know, given that lasting change does and did in both of those cases take a long time, you know, centuries to come about, you know, you have to ask yourself, you know, how are you going to conduct yourself within the time and place that you find yourself? You can either be, you know, a good lord, a good master, a good this or that, and there's a lot of leeway in the midst of all of that, or you could be, you know, cruel and horrible and exploitive and all this stuff, even though, so in other words, you can still be a good person within a system that is in and of itself exploitive, and it's usually because you don't really have a whole lot in and of yourself to change it just by yourself. So that's where I think he finds himself. And I think that's again, that's something that's very, I think, a very mature thing to think about, because we always like to think about, oh, you know, and one person can topple an entire system, and it's like, well, you know, that's usually not true. It's usually, you know,
it's not always how it works in the moment, you know.
Well, and it's usually hundreds, if not thousands of people over a long period of time for real lasting change to take place. And it's like, you know, one person in one particular period of time is not going to do it. So I feel like he kind of knows that, but within that sphere, he really is trying to be the best possible person in Henrietta's life.
Jose and Henrietta, there's a whole spectrum of humanity through Gunslinger Girl, right? You see how the different people handle this situation. I'm sure we'll touch on them more in depth, but you know, Jose and Henrietta are kind of like at our end of the spectrum, and then the other end is like Sean and Rico, I think that's the other where he just kind of he like bitch slaps the kids sometimes. Treats her like
we're going to cover that just in a moment, because I do want to make a point about those two. But Jake, you had something about Henrietta and Jose?
Well, a couple things, but one, as far as their relationship, it's worth noting that when it comes right down to it, one thing that I don't think, did anyone else catch this? I don't think they even touched on the fact that Jose and John are brothers in the first season. So
No, I
That's what
think
I
they
remember.
did. I think they
so,
did.
but it's like you blink and miss it. It's not as
Yeah,
obvious.
it's not emphasized now.
So
Yeah,
it's
they
one of the
heavily hit that
it's
later.
one of the reasons why I said Jose is kind of stuck because he's kind of
Yeah.
he and his brother have very similar motivations for why they do what they do,
Mhm.
but they have very different ways of going about
Oh,
it. John has basically shut his emotions off, and we'll get to that in a minute. But Jose remains very emotional. He is, he's not like really like raving crazy, whatever, but like he shows his emotion to other people and to the girls much more than the other handlers typically do. Hirscher's the other one who comes close.
Yeah, that was what
But
I was
not-
going to mention. He's like a
and
good
then,
middle ground of the spectrum, I think. Like,
And then with the girls, it's similar as well in that Henrietta is probably the one who's least in control of her emotions.
So that's one of the
And-
reasons she's protecting, by protecting him, being overprotective, she messed up her
Right.
mission.
They basically they do make a good pairing and a good foil for each other because in a way they really are well matched. And she does. They do make the point. You mentioned conditioning, and I don't think we really got into that in the plot, but that's part of the thing is this so-called conditioning that they never really go into detail. Is it drugs? Is it psychological brainwashing? Is it both? They don't really fully say, but basically the girls are brainwashed to
Different
their
levels.
well, yeah, but the basic premise, the basic idea is your handler is kind of your personal god, basically. They do anything and everything for them.
They're
Now,
attack
how
dogs.
Exactly.
they are, well, yeah. They're heavily trained attack dogs, yes. But the or guard / attack dogs. And again, each handler is up to them to show their own level of conditioning, their own
yeah, it's kind of
type
at their
level of
discretion, you know.
yeah, and Jose being uncomfortable with the system and missing this little sister presence and wanting to treat Henrietta more as a human, he still ends up treating her as a child, which is still very strange given what she does for him on a regular basis. But he at least acknowledges that much of her humanity, which makes him a weirdo in the group. Again, Hirscher's the only one who understands him. Most of the others are kind of like, you're kind of weird. Especially, what was his name? Leona or whatever it is. That guy really is the exact opposite. Jean understands him. He's shut his emotions off. He sees them as
desensitized to the shit.
Basically, he sees them as unproductive. So
let's move on to Rico
and a good. Sorry, a good metaphor I think for this, for like the differences there. It's like if because the handler of Kleiss, can't remember his name, like he was the short-lived one. He was attempting to expose this thing, and he of course mysteriously disappears. Yeah. And so I mean I imagine that to a certain extent Jose probably knows that is a very likely possibility, and that what can you do with it? Can you just totally shut down your own humanity, or can you try to make do with what you have while trying to do as much good as you can in this particular environment?
Let's go ahead and do an intro. We'll go ahead and do a character so you know who we're talking about.
Yeah,
Henrietta is this one, of course. Rico, Kleiss, Triella, and then Angelica. So,
Well,
Yeah.
so looking
Well,
at this,
and extra special shout out before we move on to another character. The voice actress for the so normally the English dubs for anime can be really good or or bad or whatever. They vary a lot. Or you listen to the original Japanese language and you're like, oh yeah, this is a million times better because they seem to get the emotion of the character. It doesn't feel like they're missing something, which happens a lot with some dubs. Like you feel like, do they even know what they're saying? Yeah, like it doesn't seem like they do. But like emotionally speaking, they don't seem like they really know what to give it. Except Gunslinger Girl, it has one of the best dubs I've ever heard. I think that the actors, they have an unbelievable amount of emotion in their voices, like more so than I've ever heard in any other anime. Where a lot of the time there is sort of there is sort of a stereotypical anime English dub actor voice that you can usually...
I mean, Piccolo gets shot in the head with a friggin' sniper bullet in this show. So I mean, there's plenty of recognizable voices from other, I guess you could call them campier anime, but the performance they're having in is
cast, basically.
Well, what I'm saying is that I think it's partially the material, partially how they're directed and everything. But point being that there's a certain delivery style for the English dub actors that you'll hear most of the time in terms of how they deliver a line that you don't hear in this show. Like here, you really feel like they're saying the lines as if they happen to have, as if they had a camera on them, as if they were shooting these scenes like in front of a live action camera, like in terms of their vocal tone and their vulnerabilities and stuff.
Yeah, they're acting, like a lot of people do in Ghibli movies. Like they're not just reading a page; they're actually acting. They're in the scenes,
Well, they're in the moment, which is what good acting is. But especially the English voice actress for Henrietta, I think that the vulnerability in her voice and the fact that every word that comes out of her mouth, you can tell that she's like one teeny tiny inch away from crying. Because she's in a lot of pain and is like a really kind of scared person, despite being pretty fearless when she's on the job. But like just in life, you can really hear her fear, her sadness, her deep.
Has a little bit of apprehension in every line that she says,
Well, and this deep desire to be loved and accepted. It's a lot like what John Hurt did in The Elephant Man, like his particular version of Joseph Merrick was, I think, as we said, was a little bit more intelligible than the real guy was, which it's good because that way we can understand him a little bit better. But like point being, they make up for it in the fact that the vocal tones and the just every word you just hear the sadness dripping from it. I feel like she does that same utterly brilliant delivery, and I think the other actresses do too. But like she especially, because she's so kind of emotionally unstable and so much of a weirdo compared to the other girls, except for maybe Kleiss. But she responds to her crisis in a different way. I just had to give special shout out to not just her, but also just the cast in general, that they really gave it their all, I think.
And I will eventually need to watch the English dub. I, of course, did the Japanese. And I will say a couple comments. One thing that has been...
No, I had to do it.
Is that apparently they took serious liberties with the original script with the English dub, so that's one thing to keep in mind. But
that makes me want to go back through it.
As far as the Japanese dub, I think they had the same cast for both seasons in the English dub. They did not. The Japanese dub was completely changed, like almost every aspect of the production was. And I first noticed it with Marco, and we'll talk about Marco soon, but he was so different in the second season. I was like, holy crap, this is not the same character. And a lot of that had to do with the vocal delivery of the character. And so from that perspective of watching both Japanese casts, I think the first cast did do a better job with the vocal acting. I do think that they definitely had a more, as you said, more emotion, more. The whole thing had less of a glossy anime vibe, if you will, than. So I will look forward to one day watching the English dub. It's just.
Well, I will say this: the voice cast does stay the same in both seasons.
Well, there you go. Okay.
The English dub is fantastic. Like it's such that I'm like, more of that, please. Like it was like I said, like their vocal delivery is on par with what you would want from an actor in front of the camera, where they don't have the luxury of like Mark Hamill, for example, loves doing voiceover work because people can't see you, and so you could make the outrageous expressions Batman. You could do all that stuff that would look bad if you were to do that in front of the camera. But it's sort of it's just nice to and actors that are typically in front of the camera that then go back and do voiceover work. Oftentimes you can kind of tell that they are trying to approximate what they maybe might do in front of the camera, but they're not like Mark Hamill is like a virtuoso at that. But like a lot of actors, they do not feel like they're in their element. But like here, it feels like people that normally are in their element, that they're going one step beyond by treating it as though they were in front of the camera. And you can not only can you hear their vocal intonations, but in your mind you can almost see their faces, like their live action faces, complementing their animated ones, of course.
We should probably get back to the plot itself, or to the characters. I wanted to bookend one other thing with Henrietta and Jose, because you had talked about it at the end of it, Dane, and then we went into the dub thing, so it kind of got there. Yeah. But I did want to make one point that does kind of flow from the first to the second, and the biggest thing that is hinted at is the gift that he gives her, the antique gift of I think kaleidoscope.
Kaleidoscope, yeah.
And the story that's of a kind of a one-sided deal when it comes to the love that's there. And in a way there is that, because Jose has a wall up with Henrietta that you don't see as you start, but as you sit there and you look at the relationship, you realize that you start to think, is he being nice to her just simply because he's a great guy, or is he being nice to her for some other reason?
Right.
And that really did set that up, and I think it's a great thing. Again, everybody should check out the second season as well. The first season, I think, is much better at jerking you, like a lot of the storytelling is better, but I feel like when they put all that world building, it's great having something to play around in and add to it.
Well, and also it's worth noting that the second season, the head writer was the actual writer of the manga.
Yes.
So whereas the first season was more of an adaptation from Madhouse, which it is worth noting this was a Madhouse production, and they did do some pretty fun stuff back in the day. They still do, from what I remember, but they're definitely their unique thing. And on the topic you said, I think when I started talking about the conditioning, I was going to make this point, and I think I rambled away from it. But like they make the point of, because of the conditioning, the girls themselves, and they make the point a few times in the series. I think Henrietta and Triella, I think both make similar statements, and some of the others do as well. They themselves don't really know how much of what they're feeling is what they're feeling, and what they've been conditioned to feel. But as a line that I've always loved, very much read through my mind several times watching these series, and that is the line from A Good Simpleton: I choose to believe what I was programmed to believe.
Well, speaking of
I
program
remember that.
chivalry,
Which,
let's talk
well,
about
that
Rico.
actually, yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
What to lead into that? Rico. Well, to lead into that, Rico,
Mhm.
Henrietta, and I think most of the girls, they are turned into cyborgs when they
Right.
are prepubescent, but like Triella's the notable exceptions where
Yeah.
she's getting like period cramps and stuff
Well,
because
she.
she was turned kind of later.
It's also hinted she's been around
But
for a
then I
while. Yeah, and
Like 7
Angelica
years.
has
I
been.
think Angelica's been around the
yeah
longest. So
And Clyde's, no, Clyde's is harder to say how long,
Wise
but
is one of the two older too, but
Yeah,
they're the two teens of
yeah.
the group. Well,
Well,
Angelica,
and
sort
they
of.
only hint at Triella's origin in the first series. When you see her origin,
Yeah,
yeah,
her origin is a very but all of
it's
them
messed up.
have
They're all messed up, and we
they all
should
are
probably.
messed up in a way. They all have
I don't
their
think we
trauma.
mentioned Henrietta, how she came into their. She basically, her entire family was pretty much slaughtered, and they don't go into explicit detail, but it seems like the people behind it didn't feel like she needed to be slaughtered right away. We'll put it that way. Yeah, so she has all sorts of trauma that she was dealing with, even and some also physical.
Yeah.
There's like one line of dialogue where she explicitly says something that was done to her as part of the condition of becoming a cyborg that is directly related to what happened to her. And that was pretty tragic little note there.
Right.
So they all have their own crazy backstories.
that's what I was getting at
Yeah.
was that that's what I was getting at. She and Rico, and especially the younger ones, they have their uteruses taken out, as part of it because, well, they're kind of expected to be children for, well, however long that they can be. I mean, the goal is to try to keep them around as long as possible because.
Yeah, she says it in the English dub.
Okay, well, again, the English dub, they apparently took
explicitly.
liberties. They apparently changed a lot. Maybe that was one thing they changed. I don't know. Maybe it's in the manga.
They treat him like very disposable,
Well,
The way they made it sound in the Japanese dub, it sounded like that was a direct result of what happened to her. That was the.
It's quite.
Henrietta was. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know. In Rico's case,
that's also part of what's
there may have been something. There may have been something else wrong with. There may have been some other reasoning for Rico, because Rico, and I guess this would be a good. She basically was just born weak. Like in my understanding is that she was pretty much almost a vegetable, not quite, but almost. So she's kind of an interesting case.
She had like a lot of health problems.
Right.
Yeah.
She's kind of an interesting case because even though, right, in her case, I think she probably has more of her memory than some of the others do. But in her case, she's very vibrant. She's very lively. And it's partly because she's just so happy to be able to move around freely. It's just like, even though John openly treats her as a weapon, he openly talks about her as just his weapon. She is just so happy to be alive that she's fiercely loyal because of that.
But she's also the most emotionally detached.
Yeah,
that's exactly what I was getting at. Was that she and Henrietta are a very good foil for each other because her handler does not treat her very. I don't know if I wouldn't necessarily say outright abusive, but he's someone that definitely doesn't treat her as anything more than like his attack dog, basically. But she also like neglectful or just not compassionate. But she, like you said, she's so thankful to just be alive and be moving around again and all that stuff that she also, you could also say that she, to a certain extent, that she does have her priorities. I don't know if in the right place is the right way to say it, but she knows how much worse it could be as far as like being totally like vegetated or in so much immobility and pain and all that stuff that
basically like she
is,
says it right off. Like if I just keep doing what I'm told, they'll be nice to me.
Well, that and
Poor
also,
Emilio.
that and also she is much better than Henrietta at emotional, not only distancing, but it's particularly compartmentalization of one's life. Because with Henrietta, like she's well, they've all been through a lot, but like for her, it's representative of the person that their trauma is like ever present and it infects like everything that they do. And obviously there's no trauma affects people in different ways, but like it's that kind of person versus the kind of person where it's there, but they also compartmentalize it. They try to frame it around, the way that things could be versus the way that they are now, and how where they are now isn't perfect, but it's better than where they were. And, learning that they needn't borrow trouble, basically. And because she is very good at her job, by all accounts, she's a lot more emotionally stable than Henrietta. She's very much a product of her own handling. And she, by all accounts, she's much more of a, I guess you'd say, like a textbook success story for this kind of program.
And I want to touch on that relationship between her and Jean, especially because I'm not sure we'll be able to get to the alternative relationship in time at the pace we've got. With Jean is very similar to another handler in a way, even though Jean is a lot more singular focused in his, and the other handler I'm thinking about, which is Lauro, he was more, this is just a job, but they're very similar in how they handle their particular partners. And the difference is between Elsa and not Henrietta and Rico, is that Rico has more of that detachment, whereas Elsa had more of a pride, more of a my handler is all I need. Whereas Rico, I think Rico would have been fine without anybody. She could have killed her handler or two.
I think I would disagree that Lauro and Jean treat them the same way. I think Jean won't admit it, but he actually trusts and values Rico to a degree that Lauro never could. Lauro he does. He sees it as a job. He sees her as a tool to get the job done, and he doesn't even care. John cares, and because of that, he has to care about every aspect of the job. When you really care about a job, you care about every part of it in a way that someone who's just collecting a check isn't going to, if that makes sense.
And again, also, shades of the same character, shades of the same basic concept. As they both look at their significant one. I mean, at their partners as weapons.
Right.
And only as weapons. Jean kind of gets closer as time goes by, but season one, it is basic. Rico is his weapon, and if you gotta slap it around and do another conditioning round, you do that, and it's just as it is. Now, as it goes on, it's a little bit more. You get to understand Jean a little bit more, but he's just kind of like this, focused on his job. Don't get attached. It's just a weapon. It's a tool.
Well, then, and again, part of that,
from what I
motivation, but with Jean, part of that was what we were saying about Rico, compartmentalizing and masking the pain. But I did want to make one observation again about the fact that Rico spent her first 11 years in a hospital bed, basically. You hear the conversation between her parents and the people from and you come to, basically, John may think of her just as a tool, but he thinks of her as a valuable tool without which he cannot effectively do his job. He relies on her. And her parents saw her as nothing more than a nuisance, nothing more than a drain. They were happy to be rid of her. So even if John doesn't love her, it's still a step up for her. So it's like,
Well, yeah,
exactly.
that's not.
Yeah.
It's
Shoot,
a little bit like, well, it's like
Laura would have
you're.
been a step up for her.
yeah, exactly.
Well, it's like
Well, I
it's
don't
like
know.
if you're. Well, it's like if you're a farmer, and you like bought your first tractor with your own money, and it's like, is it a tool to do your job? Yes, but you like take a lot of pride in it, and you want
Right.
it to work well and all that stuff. It may act up every now and again, but that's why you got to retool it and everything. So, had it not
Mhm.
been, if a tractor was what it is, which is just an inanimate object and it had no humanity to it, then it's like, well, that's fine. But like in this case, we're dealing with someone that's part machine but also part human, and they're not sure exactly what percentage is which. But it's like you can understand that basic line of reasoning. Plus, I think that the people that tend to do well in counterterrorism fields in real life, they tend to be very good at, well, the compartmentalization, but also just the not getting too attached and not allowing yourself to crumble in tough situations. And that's something that you find with people in the FBI, especially people in the CIA, who have to be willing to just disappear at any moment, or that they could disappear at any moment. And so their ability to have a lot of close friendships and that kind of stuff is very heavily compromised. Like I know people that like, I can't remember who it was. It was like someone that I think my like parents knew or somebody, or like, one of those friends of friends of friends kind of things, that person's spouse was in the CIA, and that person had to be okay with the fact that their spouse just had to go every now and again, and they couldn't tell them where or why or anything. They just had to just poof disappear, and that was it. And it's like you
Or
can
to
only
bring it,
imagine what that would do to a person.
well, to bring it back to the series, you get to see what it does to a person. One of the most affecting sequences I think in the whole first series is when Rico is sent to do reconnaissance for an assassination, and she meets a bellboy who works at the hotel,
Emilio.
and they hit
homie.
it off. They hit it off. She just
Son of a
she
bitch.
has a moment where she is a girl and he is a guy who likes her,
Yeah.
and he really wants to see her again. And because she dallied when she gets back, she gets a sharp rebuke from Jean. But she just puts her head down. And then when she goes back to do the job, the stupid kid shows up at the wrong time.
Hey, he was doing his job, man.
That's
like
true.
he was sent up there for that room service that
That's
they
true.
called.
But she ends up having to make a choice, and she compartmentalizes and carries out the job, which includes getting rid of all witnesses. And that was a rough episode.
It was, but let's be real here. Emilio was fucking annoying. Okay, that kid opened up way too much, way too quick.
It's
red flags all over the place.
It's
rough. You knew he was dead the second that guy was like, if you meet someone, you got to kill him.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's rough, but at the same time, it's like you could see why. But you also see why she, out of all the girls, would be trotted around as being like the ultimate success story, and like what these girls should be like, and to a larger extent, kind of what.
Yeah, dude, she blew Emilio's brains out all over that fucking rigatoni or whatever they ordered up there in Italy.
That ability to dispassionately compartmentalize is one of the reasons why I was saying that they could theoretically get the same person to play her and Kino. That would be cool.
Well, I mean, generally speaking, people in really high risk, not just counterintelligence, but I'm thinking of like if you're a brain surgeon or you're something where there's a lot of pressure all the time, then you have to have like a stomach of steel, pretty much. You have to not get freaked out by things, because I know tons of people that, well, I think I try to be more that way than not, because what I have found is that people that are the latter, they tend to crumble under mildly tough situations, let alone like really hard situations. And so I think for her, it's, is it coming at the expense of her ability to perhaps be happy in the traditional sense? It definitely is, but at the same time, it shows that doing it that way can produce the government's intended results, which is why someone like Henrietta is kind of an outlier. But they all kind of represent different aspects of what this kind of thing can do to a person, because Triella is kind of the mother figure of the group because she's the oldest, and not autonomy, but like she's been around, she kind of knows the ropes, she takes on more of a comforter kind of role, and you will see that much of the time that there are people whose personalities are just kind of geared towards that, and then like that's in sharp opposition to my favorite character, Kleiss. She is far more, she's the most intellectual of the bunch. She's very introspective. Her particular problems with her physical rehabilitation and her, having had to have her memory wiped and that kind of stuff, it was creating a problem. And so she mostly is in the background, but she also has no qualms about telling it like it is and being abundantly factual to people that are going through a lot of turmoil. And part of that is because of those parts of her memory that are just like a vague notion of something from the past, but it was actually the influence of her tough as nails handler, who also, despite being tough as nails, he really did grow to care about her and about the inhumanity of this government program. And I think all of these girls, they're all very unique reflections of their carrier, of their handlers. And I think Kleiss is that way in a very interesting sense, because all of her handlers' best qualities are ones that she can only barely vaguely remember. But also like the other side of the coin is her just unrelenting, she's so brutally honest to the point where, she's pretty unforgiving to herself and to others. And, I think that's just such an interesting reflection of the whole group dynamics.
Why don't we move on to Kleiss and Raballo?
Right.
Now, Raballo is recruited actually by Jean to go in and join, and she doesn't quite. They try and hit it off as best they can. First, he's trying to be overly strict, and then he decides to mix in a special time, like, okay, we're gonna go fishing together.
It wasn't so much that he was being overly strict as he didn't understand that they were conditioned to do exactly what he told them to do. And
he also didn't really know how to handle kids at all.
Well, yeah, that too. And but he does, one of the things that I found interesting, which is why she gets so into reading, really, is that he tells her point blank that a soldier who has no curiosity and doesn't read, to him, is someone who can't be trusted, because they'll just blindly follow orders, and what good is that?
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, and
you
so
don't want to be dealing with just a drone,
right, exactly.
Well, and that's her character in particular. Out of all the characters, Kleiss reminded me the most of myself, because my dad could be very strict and very like perfectionistic and everything, but he also was the one who really gave me a love of reading and learning, and trying to maintain like a all around pursuit of excellence in all kinds of areas, like how she likes fishing even though she doesn't know why, and just all these different like it's about achieving balance and excellence in a lot of different areas, not just being a mindless drone, especially to not be a mindless drone. And so her I think analytical nature and her just lack of patience for people's stupidity. Like I think that is very endemic of her own upbringing, shall we say? But it also reminds me so much of what I was taught to value and to, to act to like, in other words, to be really, really good at what you do, but also don't just be a mindless drone. Don't be a blind, follower. And I do find that interesting that she is that way and she has her glasses, but she doesn't really need them. She just sort of does it because she likes doing it. Again, it was kind of a vague memory of this person that she doesn't really remember now.
She had originally, if I remember correctly, she had glasses when they gave her the upgrade, if you will, the cybernetics. They fixed her vision so she didn't need them, but her handler held on to them, and he gave them to her shortly before leaving, and he asked her very pointedly, he's like, and this is not an order, this is a promise between us. When you wear the glasses, you will be gentle. And I do like that there was one exact point in the series after that where she pointedly took the glasses off, kicked some ass, and then put them back on. And I thought that was kind of fun. But most of the time, she just wears the glasses.
Yeah.
And as far as the fishing thing, as far as the fishing thing, we didn't mention that Henrietta is actually a pretty decent violinist. And the handlers, each of them is encouraged to find things to help the girls. I think I don't remember who said it. I don't remember who said it to Roballo, but he said that she'll never get good at shooting until she fixes her coordination. Yeah. So he chose fishing as a way to teach her coordination. Jose chose the violin as a way to teach. So that was kind of a fun little aspect, too, that they would use these kind of different physical activities that you would think have nothing to do with the task at hand, but they really do. To play the violin where it doesn't sound like a cat screeching, or to fish where you can actually catch a fish, these are things that do require some actual.
They teach you a similar principle, You see that shit with dudes like Miyamoto Musashi. Dude was like an expert samurai, but he was also a calligraphist or whatever, and an accomplished painter. I think dudes do stuff like that sometimes to almost hone.
I don't know why.
There are several.
The Razor doing his thing with his training.
There are several
big old. Remember,
there's tons of real life examples of that where Dwight D. Eisenhower, when he was president, because obviously he was probably by the then modern standards of what a warrior was, having been the supreme Allied commander of the European theater in World War II, he was essentially at the pinnacle of what it meant to be a warrior in his time and place. And then when he was president, he took up painting, and then I'm thinking of Larry Fine, from the Three Stooges. When he was a kid, his dad poured it was hot, forget what it was like a hot molten liquid or something on his hand. It fucked up his hand pretty bad, and so the way to help strengthen the hand again was to learn the violin. And that's why in a lot of those Three Stooges shorts, why they would put that to good use, because he actually became quite accomplished. And then, I'm thinking of a stereotypical movie example of Mr. Miyagi teaching, Daniel how to do moves by these very specific kinds of chores, but it was not specifically about that. It was about a form of discipline that goes throughout one's whole life in everything that one does, which is a very Eastern idea, but it makes sense.
Put it simply, weird motherfuckers do weird shit, because they get good at one weird thing by doing a bunch of other weird things that make them good at weird shit.
Contemporary of the Stooges, like a contemporary of the Stooges, you had you watch the Marx Brothers films, and Harpo's the one who's doing all the pratfalls and all the physical comedy and all this, but he also would just sit and play the harp like nobody, and that's not skill.
Well, and these things are often like shadow skills of each other,
Right.
where there's a reason why, like, if you're a musician, then there's a good probability that you'll probably be pretty good at math, because they're very interconnected, as well as, there is something to like Stanley Kubrick, the great filmmaker who approached things in a very methodical, strategic manner, was also a master chess player. So there are usually these things, these skill sets that are very close cousins of each other,
Right.
but it's all goes into creating that whole well-rounded person, and one skill makes the other better. And I think that, well,
All those
Kleist's
possibilities,
story,
and I rolled drinking beer and watching movies. That's
Kleist's,
Hey, those go hand in hand for a lot of
they
people.
do. Yeah, it's productive, I suppose.
well, Kleist's story is a great example of that. I think pretty essential truth that doesn't really get expressed very often, and just the striving for becoming great at what you primarily pursue, but then also having an appreciation and love of these other things that are seemingly not related, but actually are very related when you think about it. And so I feel like, despite the fact that her memory of her handler is largely gone, but she's left still with the lessons that she was taught, and how it does make her a lot more, well, tranquil in many ways than the other girls. She's less turbulent, but she also and is also a lot more focused when she needs to be, and also just doesn't take other people's shit. And it's like, I think we can all learn something from that. Oh, there's a kitty.
So we only have like about 20 minutes and some change, and we got a lot to cover. But I want to go ahead and round up, of course, Kleist, by letting them know that, one, she did inherit a large library from her handler, from Triella, and then she also, because she really wasn't able to work out quite as well physically, they used her as a test subject.
Basically,
so she doesn't go on the mission. She just goes and she does a bunch of tests for the scientists.
And there is a fascinating episode. It seems like filler at first, but it's actually a valuable episode, I think, in the second one, where they call it A Day in the Life of Kleist.
Yes.
And that one's worth noting, if only because she gets into the song Scarborough Fair, and I love that cover that they use. That was such a nice cover.
And that's one of the reasons why I want to get some time for the music, which is why I'm going to move quickly. So I do apologize if I cut through to make sure. I'm going to touch briefly on Triella. She's not covered as much as the others in the first season.
Freaking stars, second one.
But when Dane was talking about like conditioning, her handler had to go through intense conditioning, looking at these like bodies of mangled little children and stuff like that, where you get to see, whereas she is like one of those victims of that. And it kind of haunts her, but it's also weird because she comes across as almost the most normal teen-wise of all of them. She's a little bit, she's a little bit more separated than other teens, but she has more of a self, I guess you could say.
Partly
she's more maternal. She's more.
I think she's the first one too to bring up, like, what, are you going to just condition me more because I did something that you don't like? Like,
one of the things is that Hirscher is so reluctant to condition. Like, I think he understood that with the trauma in her past, she needed some, but he doesn't want to use it unless it's like necessary.
And because of that, she comes across as the most alive out of all of them in many ways. But she also, and the almost exact opposite of the one I think that gets the most conditioning, which is Angelica.
To her detriment.
See, they're my favorite characters for sure, man. I like that they're kind of dead in the middle of a lot of it at first. It's like,
Triella's a fun character, I think, and she really, again, they do get so much more into her the second go around. She almost takes over, she's more the star than Henrietta the second go round.
She's probably the most tragic case of the first season.
Oh, she is kind of, yeah. And but yeah, she has that thing where she's easy because I guess she's more in touch with her regular emotions. She's more easily disappointed, I guess you could say, and more likely to sulk, which does become an issue with her eventually. But she's also a little better than Henrietta at being on the high end of it too. I feel like she's a little more better at just kind of being. I don't know. That's not
realistic.
She's kind of detached. She's detached, but not in the way that Rico is detached. She's detached because the conditioning has scrambled her brain to the point where she can barely remember her handler from day to day, and that's. I mean, they make it now. Her mind doesn't seem to be as gone in the second season. But in the first season, they make it look like her mind is
Angelica, I must have missed that part because she's the one who tried.
Well, I was going to say, Angelica's the one that's. I think she kind of reminds me of Rico in the detachment way.
I missed the part where we went to Angelica. That's why I was confused.
Yeah. Okay. Angelica she got so badly fried. That was the tragic part.
Yeah.
That's why she and like in much the same way that Rico and Henrietta are foils for each other, I think that Kleiss and Angelica, they are foils for each other also, because when Angelica's attempting to do what she needs to do, again, her conditioning's been so extensive that it's just fried her brain, whereas with Kleiss, it's more her physical troubles that get in the way that prevent her from doing a lot of those same things. But I think in terms of their will, Kleiss is by far the most strong out of all of them in terms of being pretty indomitable, whereas Angelica's very she comes across as very much a victim, and so that's why they're all victims. They're all victims, but it's.
She was out walking the dog, and her parents tried to run them over with a car.
Yeah, this is extremely tragic.
Well, I mean, they're all victims in terms of what's happened to them. I'm speaking more so in terms of their overall mentalities, because they're all victims in terms of what happened to them. But with Kleiss, she seems to come from, I guess you'd say, almost they don't make this isn't, I'm just kind of reading into it, but it's almost like from a similar place of stoicism, where you kind of take what life gives you and try to not fight it or whatever, but you make the most of what you're given in your lot in life, for example. And so with her, she largely toughs it out, but also she has no time for Angelica's bullshit and just whacks her. And I was like, that's so great. And I looked it up to make sure that I remembered this correctly, but actually Kleiss is a boy's name. And so that's part of what also makes her stand out, is that the other girls because
he was trying to separate himself emotionally from her.
Right.
But I do think that's such an interesting little point of, because Henrietta is a beautiful girl name, Triella, Angelica, all these really beautiful kind of flowery names. And Rico, I guess Rico does sound more masculine, and then Kleiss is a really, that sounds kind of, I don't know if it's German or what.
Kleiss was taken from the person who raised her, apparently. I think that was his middle name.
Jean and God, what was his name? The one who was with and Roballo. I mean, they come from the same basic training school, and in a way, it was. And Jean kind of did that urging of that separation. So, and Jean, that's the reason why Jean gave Rico the name Rico. Again, separation tool.
Right.
Yeah.
And actually, Rico really is, not just because of the name, but Rico really does come across as kind of androgynous at first, and that's kind of but that's probably by design. Again, John not really encouraging that all that much. And the I do want to mention as far as Angelica and her handler Marco. Marco is an interesting case because he was an MP, right? Military police, am I remembering correctly? He actually has ties to a number of characters that you don't even get into in the first season. His ex-girlfriend went to school with Franca, but it's basically he had taken it on originally because I think he had eyesight issues. They wouldn't let him do his job properly, so he was offered this position. He took it on. Initially, he was fascinated, I think, by Angelica, and he really wanted to be there for her. He was enthusiastic about it, and then over time, I think it was when her memory started failing her, wasn't it? That he just
started building a wall.
He started building a wall because he saw what the conditioning was doing to her and all that stuff. And eventually he got to the point where it hurt him to even look at her. Mm-hmm. So he was an interesting one because he initially was closer to Jose and ends up much more like Lauro by the end. Mm-hmm. And eventually he does come back around a little bit. I think it was Henrietta and Kleiss really who brought him back to, and you got that nice touching scene at the end of this season. And I'm just going to go ahead and throw this out here. Did anyone else watch that and think that was Angelica's death?
I thought it could have been her death at that point. I thought they were going to go there, but they decided not to.
They very much decided not to. When she was alive and well in the second season, I was like, what the hell happened?
There you go.
Matter of fact, she looked like she was recovering in the second season, that she was finally trying to be more of herself.
Well, I think they had her on a pretty intense drug regimen that helped her do that. But so basically, like constant conditioning, if I understood it correctly.
Pretty much. We've got like 10 minutes left. So let's touch on the music. Sure. I definitely want to. We don't have enough time to really touch on it like I want to, but music is such a huge part of the show, and it would be criminal to not touch on it. And one of my favorite anime themes, like one of my top favorite anime openers, is the opener from the second season. I linked it for people to listen to if they wanted to in the full. I don't know if you actually got the chance to sit down with it, Dane. I know you didn't see the season, but the Tata Hitotsu no Omoi. That I don't know what it is.
I hadn't yet.
But it's such a haunting theme. Yes. It's kind of a upbeat if you listen to it just from the surface, but if you listen to it in depth, you hear all the background. And I haven't listened to many songs like this in a while, but back when I actually was more into music and I did do singing and I did do a little bit of musical instruments, I always loved listening to the various pieces of each thing, like the notes in the background, the various the playing of the piano. I don't know what it is about that. That one and Scarborough Fair, both incredibly beautiful and haunting at the same time.
I don't know what the English theme song's called.
The Light Before We Land.
I probably read it. I totally dig. See, I opted out of your guys' little experiment here with the theme songs because I didn't want to listen to anything else but that early 2000s sort of like hippie goth Lilith Fair bullshit that is the theme song for the American version, and I love it. I love it. I don't know why.
The Delgados
to watch the show.
Yeah, it's a Scottish group called the Delgados, and I don't think that was just for the American. That was
that was in both versions. Yeah.
And then they had an operatic Italian language one called Dopo il Sogno for by the ender. And the second season is notable. One of the changes they really did a lot that made it more of a typical anime. And one of the things was the fact that both the openers and enders were Japanese language. But yeah, Tata Hitotsu no Moi by Kokia is a kick-ass song. It's phenomenal. And the ender is called Doll. It's a very pretty song. The first 5 episodes and 2 of the later episodes are sung by Tada Aoi, and the other episodes are sung by Leah. Leah is the one who sings most of the key stuff, the clanade, air. She is a phenomenal singer.
Oh, yes.
And Doll was wonderful. But here is a wonderful connection back to Bebop. Tada Aoi, who sings Doll for those episodes and who sang that episode of Scarborough Fair, is the voice actress behind Edward Wong Hall Pepelu.
Nice. That's cool.
So,
Yeah.
so y'all only really kind of listened to the music from the first season. What are y'all's thoughts about
I didn't
the
want to
music?
spoil it for myself for the second one, which I feel bad that I didn't get a chance to watch this second season just because the first is my favorite anime, but I have been meaning to do it. But like, what's interesting about
you said that because you said so much about the show, and I was like, he never saw that.
oh, I know. Well, it's
Well, hopefully
life
this
is
has
nuts,
inspired
but-
you to try it out.
Yeah,
'cause
Yeah,
I
dude,
will.
dude.
I will. But the but here's the thing. So the light before we land, like we said, was the season 1 opening theme there. But what's interesting, so iTunes was sort of weird on this, but there was a piece of instrument. The score for this show is incredible. There was a piece of score that was used. I can't even remember which episode, but it was used as a replacement opening theme, and it was a lot more like traditionally cinematic. And I was like, hey, that's pretty cool too. It doesn't really, it's not as music video ish as the opening is that we're used to, but I thought, hey, that's kind of interesting. I imagine they did it because they probably couldn't get the rights for the song at the time, if I had to guess, but it was kind of an interesting change up. But I think the music as a whole is really beautifully orchestrated and very emotional, very
Yeah, it fits the show perfectly.
well, and it's head and shoulders above what you typically hear in most shows in general, not just anime, because of the kind of you can feel the history of where they are setting the show, like Italy, and also there's some dramatic aspects to it in the sense that like they end it with the ode to joy, but it's I believe it's an Italian translation or adaptation of it, and so I thought, hey, that's kind of neat. And
that's worth noting that the girls actually sing, like you said, Italian lyrics to the song. But yeah, they're sitting there singing the song, and I think it's Jose and Hirscher, right, that are there, and they kind of comment on who would have thought these little, that we would be hearing them doing.
I know. Well, but that also shows that even I think that's really the theme of the show. If I had to sum it up completely, which is that even in a situation as like dehumanizing or as hopeless or as whatever as this one, that the capacity for one's humanity, one's compassion, one's spirit can shine through regardless, and one can can essentially still have the dream alive as far as like higher pursuits and what makes life worth living. And it's possible even for those who are in these otherwise hopeless situations. And I think that really kind of sums it up. It's a very it's funny because like some people were sort of saying like that certain anime that they were very like certain directors' filmmaking, and you could argue that like this has some aspects of a Kubrickian worldview, but specifically through what he was getting across with some of the initial concepts for AI that Spielberg obviously carried into fruition, because that's all about someone trying to hold on to dreams and aspirations in the midst of a world that is uncaring and cruel and abusive and horrible, and this child is trying to navigate it.
Our boy Michael McNally's back down there. That guy's a regular. Cheers, bro.
Oh yeah, I didn't even see we got a few things here going on.
Oh well, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna address some of it, but I will. I will say one thing to address.
Hey, Jess.
Is our final thoughts. I know you were you started us along the way because we've got like 5 minutes left.
I feel I can sum it up real quick by saying that.
Real quick though, we talked about the music, but we do need to at least address that overall the production value was pretty top notch.
Oh yeah,
House really did their the attention to detail on the weaponry, on the costuming,
when she's loading that clip.
Yeah, they really did. Yeah. So any show that really does their homework, I got to appreciate that too.
For sure.
All right. Well, so I guess we'll go back to you, Mo. You were talking about your final thoughts.
Well, Gunslinger Girl's kind of one of those shows where it's like it's a crazy examination of humanity. People trying to regain their humanity, people trying to keep their humanity, people trying to figure out what the fuck humanity is. And I think we're along for the ride in that. There's all sorts of relationships happening. They do a lot with a cast that could have been a lot bigger and like a lot more disjointed if they really weren't doing their sort of due diligence of focusing it down to have all these different character archetypes in these sets of like double characters basically. The Gunslinger Girl, that first season, is a good example, I think, of almost perfectly crafted anime where it maybe isn't getting into that big villain arc or the story set in the world, but goddamn does it do a good job of building that world and the characters that live in it. Like, you care about every single freaking one of them by the end of it to some capacity, whether you hate them or you love them or you just want to see where they end up. It's a good, concise execution of that goal, which I think every anime series probably wishes that they could do in friggin' 13 episodes. So,
and Jake,
it's prime top tier shit. Is basically what I'm saying.
Oh, definitely. And you, Jake?
Soundtrack kicks a lot of ass too.
It does. It is a really good show. I am glad I finally got around to it. I know some of the reasons it took so long, but I also don't know why it took so long. It's definitely a show that will not be for everybody. If you are easily offended or you are very sensitive to potential exploitation topics, it may have some difficulty. If you can get past that and just appreciate that it's telling. One of the coolest things about it, and I'll leave. I guess
he's just like, nope.
I think one of the coolest things about it is that it doesn't really take sides. Like the first one, you look at the girls and you look at their handlers. The second one really brings in the terrorist side of it. It really doesn't really take sides. It doesn't hit you over the head with these people are right, these people are wrong.
There's a good moment where they basically say politics are fluid. Like people will flop sides the moment that they think that they can get something for their own cause, So
there are times where I see a production like that and I feel like that's reckless or that's unfortunate. But there are times where I'm like, that's brilliant. And it all has to do with the execution. And I feel like this show executed that sort of moral ambivalence better than most of the shows out there.
That's what I loved about. Go ahead.
Oh, there you go.
Well, that's what I loved about it was that I really love the fact that this could have devolved into like exploitation territory. It is a story about the exploitation of children, but it is not in and of itself exploitive. If anything, it's quite humane in its treatment of these inhumane topics. And it's more so that for me, it's like I like that in a metaphorical way it can touch upon things that happen every day in the world. If it's not children, it's whatever other kind of group that is it is mistreated or abused or whatever. I think it just hits particularly close to home with me because it does involve children and their quest to try to differentiate and try to be hold on to whatever shred of humanity that they have left in the face of adults that want to take it away from them and a world that wants to take it away. And I think it speaks.
It's the Goonies with machine guns, man.
Well, but it's
Wow.
something that I think it's very important, and people don't really want to think about it because it's too uncomfortable. But it's like, but it's something that people do need to think about, because if we don't, then it'll just keep happening. And I know in my own limited way, how important it is to keep those dreams alive and to keep, that kind of focus, because if you don't, then the tidal wave of, life and grief and abuse and everything will just destroy you. And so it's really about overcoming all of that. And, what better way to make that point than with children, and also to show that even amongst the, abused/abuser, even to show it amongst that kind of abuser class of people, that there are good people within it, or people trying to do what they think is right and perhaps not always getting there. But it's like that is also the real world. You have people that are in the class of an oppressor, and that class is in and of itself oppressive, but are they themselves necessarily, monsters? And it's like, so often we like to think in these really overly black and white, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, and all the bad guys have no shred of humanity, they're, irredeemable, all this stuff. And it's like, well, in real life, things are much more morally ambivalent. They're a lot more gray, they're a lot more complex than that. Usually it's people trying to do what they think is right and perhaps not always getting there, and in effect serving a system that is corrupted, but they themselves are still trying to aim at what is good. And it's like that. Well, that's a very Kubrickian idea, that people are in pursuit of these things that they believe are good, but they end up being abusive and cruel in the process, and that they tend to inhabit their lower order instincts. But I think here it's just more palpable because they are children, and because it's like, if you can't make that point with children, then it's like, well, what better choice of target is that for that theme? Because we can all relate to it. We've all been children at one point in our lives, and they are, what group is more vulnerable and more helpless than children to make that point?
So I'm gonna wrap us.
Them putting sugar in tea too in this bit. Like they animated that really well. It always made me want a cup of tea. So shouts out.
I should get a cup of tea, actually.
Yeah,
it was the predecessor to Get Out. No, just no, just but before, let's go ahead, and I hate to wrap us, but we do need to get get started for the next discussion. But I want to give some shout outs here, just some quick ones. Of course, Kotobuki Jake, my co-host, and hopefully we will be working more as time goes, probably after the election a little bit more. But then we have, of course, Mo with the Drunken Master Studios. You want more of him? It is an excellent channel. He's been going through the Dragon Ball Z movies, and I definitely look forward to hearing more of that and the kaiju discussions.
Oh yeah, no. This crazy guy was talking the other night about. I'm trying to point the other way, but what was it you were saying? Something like Beerus was the mook, something along those lines.
Oh, that was something totally. Oh, Beerus would be a mook if he decided to bring Vegeta in there as a D&D character. And of course, Dane is on the Indie Horror Film Creative, and it's an amazing channel. You get to hear from very different voices in the industry, but you also get a lot of his insight into amazing pickups, different movies, and different types, like banned films or films that could be banned in the future. So
yeah, well,
if you want,
I had to snag up my Gone with the Wind when that whole nonsense was going on, and that scared the shit out of me, such that I was like, well, I better snag up any and all films that could possibly be seen as
dude, I kept
problematic
seeing, like,
tomorrow.
Gone with the Wind at Best
And
Buy, and I was
actually,
like, oh, Dane. Like, I just,
Yeah,
I
it scared
would
the
point at it and, like, think of your name. You know?
it scared the
Yeah.
shit out of me, you know.
you haven't gotten it from our discussion yet, if you've been following anything with what's going on with Funimation and how they are releasing stuff now, you might want to snap this up because you may not get a chance.
they're doing a lot of censoring right now.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
I have.
let me tell
I
you,
have
that
those
app
seasons.
works like ass. Okay,
I have
if you're
those
thinking of
seasons. I have
subscribing,
those seasons of the show on Blu-ray. I just haven't watched the second one yet.
dude, have you guys tried the Funimation app?
No.
Oh my god,
I
man!
don't.
I mean,
I don't
okay,
trust. I don't trust streaming.
it works enough that I'm willing to maybe keep it if it was like $4, not $8. You know?
If it makes you feel better, Crunchyroll and Funimation and I think another one, Viz, are going to be teaming up. So most of the stuff you'll be able to get from one of the
Can
others.
they make an app that fucking works? That's what we need. You know.
So with that being said, I'm going to let us go because I gotta take one break, and then we're going to try and head back in about 5 minutes for our follow-up to the Goonies. Thank you all for coming.
Yes.